Hi. Thank you. My name is Luna. This is the premiere to episode 1 of The War on Cuba, which I will be screening shortly. I'm first just going to give a brief introduction, then I will screen it, and then we'll be having a Q&A with the protagonists, Liz Oliva Fernandez and Andy Yula. First I just want to give a great, huge thanks to People's Forum that co-hosted this event with us. People's Forum is a New York City-based movement incubator that has been supporting Belly of the Beast since day one. Has been incredibly important for us because Belly of the Beast has sought to do something that's actually very rare, tell stories of the global South for a Western audience that's told by the people from that place. This is unfortunately kind of doesn't exist as much as it should. And part of the reason that Belly of the Beast exists is to be able to counter parachute journalism. So the way journalism works now is that a mainstream media outlet will have enough of a budget to pay someone to go to a foreign country and essentially follow someone around for a couple weeks and create a story about it. And then it'll be read and consumed by people in the United States or in Europe, and the people who are actually affected by US interventionist policies that are actively affected by the negative aspects of globalism and of intervention and economic warfare and real warfare are not part of the production of that media, and B, don't get their stories shared in a fair and equitable way. So that's part of why Belly of the Beast began. It's a project made by Cubans and foreigners based in Havana with the goal of exposing US intervention and the effects of the US sanctions on Cuba, but specifically for a US audience. And we realized we came up against one of the biggest issues that we have in young people getting access to this kind of these stories and this news is a language barrier. So today I'm really excited that after I premiere, we will have a discussion with Liz Oliva Fernandez, the protagonist, and I'll be translating that so that it's easier for everyone to understand, but also so that we can, it's just a great opportunity to actually understand and know what's going on in Cuba from a Cuban's point of view, because there's a lot of myth and justifications and ideas around the sanctions, but a lot of these come from people who aren't Cuban or who have never spent any time in Cuba. And it's just really important to be able to consume news from places and people who are actually being affected. So yes, I'm really excited to premiere. And I also just want to say, yeah, episode 2 and 3 are going to come out. I encourage everyone to continue following. Please email us if you have any questions or DM us. We are happy to continue dialogues, and we're going to be putting out more media. And yeah, I'm really excited. So without further ado, I'm going to screen episode 1 of The War on Cuba.
Hi, I'm Liz.
People come to Havana looking for the real Cuba, and this is what they do.
But this is not my Cuba.
My Cuba isn't so romantic, but I'm happy here. I love my country. Cuba is safe. We've got free healthcare and education. I graduated from university without paying a penny, and I became a journalist.
Pero lo mejor que tiene Cuba es su gente.
But we've got one huge problem, the economy.
La situación está mala.
Malísima.
Fea.
Pésimamente mal.
Está difícil.
Estresante.
Caótica.
En candela.
Ahora mismo está fatal.
A mí ni me pregunto.
During the pandemic, people have to wait in line for hours just to buy food.
Aquí la cosa está dura. COVID. I'm used to this. I grew up in crisis.
Y no es embargo ni bloqueo, es guerra.
The legislation I signed today further tightens that embargo. By maintaining our embargo,
El bloqueo económico persiste.
cruel e insensato bloqueo que haya existido contra nación.
Our government blames pretty much everything on the US embargo. They call it the blockade.
Es que lo queman mucho.
We get bored of hearing about the blockade all the time. But it's real. The United States has been waging war against Cuba for 60 years. It's not a war with bullets or bombs, but it touches every aspect of our lives, recently more than ever.
¿Cómo está Ernesto? Buenos días. ¿Está listo para trabajar en el campo hoy?
Cómo no, voy a trabajar ahora. Hay personas que me conocen de 25 años y no saben que me faltan las piernas.
¿Me puede mostrar sus prótesis?
Sí, cómo no. Estas son de aluminio y fibra de plástico. No tienen ni articulación, son rígidas. Y se puede partir por aquí. Y entonces la parte del pie se puede partir también. Una vez por aquí cargando un saco de yuca, se me partió por aquí. Porque a mi hija ya te digo que cuando esto se rompe es un problema.
This is where Ernesto goes to get his prosthetics, free of charge. But Ernesto can't get the specialized prosthetics he needs, because it's illegal for Cuba to buy them.
¿Y existen unas prótesis un poco más resistentes que a usted le pudieran servir más?
Existen unas prótesis más resistentes, con más calidad. Caminaría mejor, incluso podía trabajar mucho más, pero no tenemos acceso a ella por el bloqueo.
Ernesto doesn't complain. In Cuba, we've lived with scarcity for so many years, we take it for granted. The blockade is the longest trade embargo in modern history. It isn't motivated by concerns about human rights. It's about money and power. Until 1959, Cuba was like a US colony. Our economy was controlled by US companies, corrupt politicians, and the mafia. After the revolution, Cuba nationalized the US companies. We claim our sovereignty, our right to govern ourselves. The government gave basic rights to the majority: women, black people, campesinos, the working class. The blockade was retaliation. It's basically a form of economic warfare. The blockade stops Cuba from doing business with the United States. They can't buy our stuff and we can't buy theirs. And we can pay for things because banks won't lend us money or even let us open accounts. The blockade also stops Cuba from doing business with other countries. That's not all. The blockade also locks us out of a big part of the internet. We're used to getting bad news from the United States.
But 5 years ago, nos llegaron por primera vez buenas noticias de la Casa Blanca.
Does not serve America's interests or the Cuban people to try to push Cuba towards collapse.
¡Que volar!
Obama announced new relations with Cuba. He began by loosening the blockade. US airlines and cruise ships started taking tourists to Havana. Business was booming. Clandestina became Cuba's first independent design store in 2015. Idania is Clandestina's co-founder. She started the store after Cuba opened its economy to private business.
Clandestina pretende establecer el trabajo de los jóvenes diseñadores cubanos.
After Idania met Obama, Clandestina became a symbol of Cuba's new private sector.
Havana was like overcrowded, celebrities, musicians, politicians, everybody. It was insane. Chanel runway, Fast and the Furious shooting, Rolling Stone concert. The mood was anything is possible, all this sense of change, and finally to be aware of I have a future here. I can stay here, I don't have to leave my country. But then Trump won the election, so.
But all of the concessions that Barack Obama has granted the Castro regime were done through executive order, which means the next president can reverse them, and that I will do.
The Trump administration is imposing new restrictions on U.S. travel to Cuba.
John Bolton making a South Florida stop today to talk to the Cuban American community.
Unveiling sweeping changes to Cuba policy.
A major blow to the new U.S.-Cuba relationship.
The U.S. has banned flights.
All families to leave Cuba.
The U.S. government will also ban trips by cruise ships.
They'll have to go after their finances, limiting the amount of money, fresh U.S. sanctions.
It's part of a trend.
U.S. tourism stopped. And if you don't have tourism, you don't have business. No tourism, zero remittances, no trade at all. You are suffocating the private sector. You are suffocating the Cuban people.
Since COVID, things have gone from bad to worse.
¿Tiene ibuprofeno por casualidad?
No, mamita, eso está en baja.
¿Y warfarina?
Tampoco.
¿Y metformina?
Tampoco.
¿Y enalapril?
Eso está en baja.
You'd think the US might loosen the embargo during a pandemic. Nope. Recently, 2 Swiss companies refused to sell Cuba ventilators because they were owned by a larger US company. And a US-owned airline wouldn't take a donation of masks and ventilators to Cuba. On top of all that, the Trump administration made it even harder for our family members in the U.S. to send us money.
The Trump administration has killed a deal that would allow Cuban baseball players to play for Major League Baseball.
El bloqueo afecta hasta nuestro deporte nacional.
Cian Vega is one of Cuba's top young baseball prospects.
Desde chiquito siempre mi papá me inculcó entrenar, me llevaba todos los días a la pelota. Empecé a ver mi talento a partir de los 13, 14 años. Hay ya bastantes peloteros cubanos en la MLB que se han formado aquí en Cuba. Representar a mi país en el más alto nivel, que es la MLB, sería mi sueño, la verdad. Trump, cuando nos cerró las puertas de firmar con la MLB, casi todos los peloteros se sintieron mal por esa noticia.
Claro, porque ahora, en caso de que tú quisieras jugar con la MLB, tendrías que renunciar.
Tendría que renunciar a mi país, no me gustaría, la verdad. Me gustaría jugar y volver a mi país, vivir con mi familia, no estar lejos de ella.
For his rivals, tonight just might be the last big chance to stop Donald Trump.
It's hard to believe now, but 5 years ago, some Cubans thought a Trump presidency wouldn't be that bad.
Si me tuviera que escoger, yo escogería a Donald Trump.
Y sabe que Cuba tiene un mercado virgen.
Y él le interesaría mucho invertir en Cuba. Entonces no creo que todo ese proceso que ha ocurrido lo eche para atrás.
That same month, Trump's executives were visiting Cuba and playing golf here. It wasn't the first time Trump tried to do business in Cuba.
This is the website for La Oficina Cubana de Propiedad Industrial. It's where foreign companies apply to do business in Cuba.
In 2008, Trump registered his brand name for hotels, casinos, beauty contests, television programs, and golf courses.
I'm okay with the Cuba situation, but I want to tell you they should be making a good deal.
So what or who made Trump change his position on Cuba?
Guys, we have a con artist as the front runner in the Republican Party.
Thank God he has really large ears, the biggest ears I've ever seen.
And you know what they say about men with small hands?
Rubio, total lightweight.
If he hadn't inherited $200 million, you know where Donald Trump would be right now?
No,
selling watches in Manhattan.
Trump's fight with Rubio didn't last long.
A man that's really become a friend of mine, Senator Marco Rubio. Great guy.
After Trump won, they became allies. Trump let Rubio pick his Latin American team, and Rubio wrote Trump's new Cuba policy.
I have wonderful memories from our visit during the campaign. I was right before the election. I guess it worked, right?
Trump's war in Cuba has won him the support of powerful Cuban American businessmen and politicians like Marco Rubio. They helped him win Florida, the country's biggest swing state, in 2016. And Trump believes this is the way to win again in 2020.
I'm Cuban and support Trump.
I am so thrilled to be back here with all of my friends in Little Havana.
When US presidents say they are talking to the Cuban people, they're not talking to us. Because we don't get to vote in Florida.
Pero los cubanos no cogemos lucha con la política de los Estados Unidos. El bloqueo está ahí y punto. Así que para adelante, que no hay más nada.
Thank you so much. That was episode 1 of The War on Cuba, produced by Belly of the Beast. I'm so excited and honored now to be able to introduce Liz Oliva Fernandez in conversation with Andy Vila. Liz is the protagonist and a journalist of The War on Cuba. She joined the team to support in the making of the documentary in order to tell stories that she felt were left out of all media platforms. She's an independent journalist based in Havana, and her work largely delves into politics, feminism, and racism. And Andy Vila is a college student who migrated to the United States with his mom in 2004. He grew up in the city of Miami, disconnected from his family's history, and growing up, the effects of the embargo were very personal to him. He's going to talk a little bit about that today. He hopes to connect with his generation back home and begin a new dialogue about the realities faced by real Cubans. So without further ado, I'm going to let Andy take it away. Thank you both.
A ti, Luna.
Thank you, Luna. Okay, so I guess first of all, I just want to thank you for taking this effort and, elevating your voice and speaking, for so many people who don't have a voice in this country. I think one of the most interesting parts of the documentary or the first episode of the documentary that I saw was just how diverse, right? The people are that are affected by economic warfare. We saw the story of a farmer and we saw the story of a baseball player, right? These are two completely different groups of people, but in some way, shape, or form, the embargo still impacts them. But we didn't hear so much about how the embargo impacts you personally as the protagonist of this documentary. So I was hoping that you could shed some light on some of the, issues and the differences that Black women go through in Cuba and that affect Black people and women of color in Cuba. Because we do know that we live in a system that is racialized, right? And this system is global. So it affects different people in different ways. So do you want me to translate that too?
Oh, it's okay. Bueno, gracias a ustedes por invitarme. Para mí es un placer y un honor compartir mis experiencias con ustedes.
So thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to share my experiences with everyone.
En mi caso particular, es decir, cómo me afecta el bloqueo a mí. Es decir, el bloqueo afecta todos los aspectos de la vida de un cubano. Ustedes vieron la historia de Ernesto y vieron la historia de Cian, pero todas las personas que aparecen al inicio hablando sobre lo difícil que es vivir en Cuba están siendo afectadas por el bloqueo.
Well, the embargo in my case affects every aspect of my life, and you saw Sean, who's a baseball player, and Ernesto, the agriculturalist, but the embargo really affects everyone since even the beginning.
Lo que quiero decir es que como mujer, las personas negras en Cuba también nos vemos afectados y somos sobre todo los más afectados por el bloqueo.
So that Black people in Cuba are also really affected, and we are the most affected by the blockade.
El problema es que cuando llegan las oportunidades a un país, generalmente las poblaciones negras están en los sectores marginalizados de ese país.
Yeah, the problem is that we are the most marginalized in the country.
Y esas personas son las que menos acceso a oportunidades tienen, porque si bien las oportunidades en Cuba de desarrollo y de crecimiento son limitadas y de acceso a las cosas son limitadas por el bloqueo, si las personas negras por estar donde están, por vivir donde están, por su condición, son las que menos acceso tienen a ese tipo de oportunidades.
So there's already issues of access when it comes to development and access to resources because of the blockade. So Black people have extra issues in terms of access, and they're the most affected.
Por ejemplo, porque cuando estamos hablando de escasez de comida o escasez de combustible o todas estas escaseces a las que estamos acostumbrados en Cuba, generalmente las personas de clase media alta, tienen más recursos para paliar, para sobrellevar esta crisis. Pero las personas negras, pobres, son las que menos oportunidades tienen de hacerle frente.
So when we talk about scarcity in terms of stuff like petroleum and food, people who are upper middle class have more access to deal with these kinds of scarcities when they come. But poor people, Black people, have less opportunity to do so.
Y creo que yo como mujer negra también estoy afectada de esa manera, porque si bien tengo una carrera universitaria, si bien no tengo ningún tipo de problemas realmente económicos en mi vida, no puedo hablar por mí sola, yo represento un sector de la población, pero yo soy una de las pocas excepciones, no soy la regla.
So as a Black woman, I have a college degree. I don't have huge economic issues, but yet I don't represent everyone, my community.
Porque soy la excepción, no la regla. Porque soy una de las pequeñas excepciones, no la regla.
Not the rule.
Okay.
Okay. And so another thing that I found really interesting was the section where in the first episode, there's a graphic that comes up with various different platforms and internet websites that are blocked from being used in Cuba. And we know that this is something that's been going on for a long time, right? The fact that Cuba has very little access to the internet is nothing new. At times in the United States, for me living here, people in my community, right, Cuban Americans living in Miami would tell me that that was because the Cuban government didn't want people to see things and didn't want people to be online. But, you know, with the easing up of restrictions that happened when Obama was president, and with, you know, the greater access to internet that they had once Obama became president and deals started coming in, we started finding out that it wasn't actually the Cuban government that was blocking those websites. It was, you know, the American government that wasn't allowing those websites to exist in Cuba. So this is something that is very applicable to my generation, right? Because we're always online, we're always on YouTube, we're always on Facebook, we're always on Twitter. So my question is, for somebody who is growing up in Cuba right now, with all the restrictions that you face when you're trying to get on the internet, for something as simple as watching a video on YouTube, how do you think that affects your ability to develop yourself in a world that's becoming globalized and that's becoming all about the internet? And how do you think that people in our generation, people that are our age, look at that? And how do you think they see that relationship?
El problema, Andy, es que el acceso que tenemos los jóvenes cubanos a internet todavía es muy pronto para sacar conclusiones. Yo recuerdo
the access that young people have, it's too soon to start coming up with conclusions.
Yo recuerdo la primera vez que me conecté a internet, estaba en la universidad, hace mucho de eso. Y trataba de navegar en internet con la curiosidad que tiene todo el mundo cuando tienes el mundo a solo un clic. Y hubo una serie de páginas que me decían, lo siento, este contenido no está disponible para tu país.
So I remember the first time I got on the internet, I was a university student, and just like every other young person, I had a lot of curiosity, and I started navigating, and I kept coming up against pages that said, I'm sorry, this page is not available in your country.
Y es como, ¿qué? ¿Estaré haciendo algo mal? ¿Es algo que no he manejado bien? Hasta que no logras tener conciencia de eso, es decir, hasta que alguien me dijo, no, es que el bloqueo no nos permite acceder a este tipo de información, y estaba como, what the fuck?
So yeah, I thought that I might have been doing something wrong or bad until someone told me it's because of the blockade doesn't let us access certain information.
Y es como surreal, yo creo que es una experiencia surreal, porque estamos hablando de herramientas. Yo creo que es una experiencia surreal porque estamos hablando de herramientas de investigación, estamos hablando de compras online, estamos hablando de acceso a una plataforma como Zoom, algo tan básico que les pudiera parecer decir, los cubanos no pueden acceder a Zoom, no, los cubanos no podemos acceder a Zoom, y está en todas partes y no lo vemos.
So it's surreal because we're talking about investigative tools, we're talking about shopping online, we're talking about access to certain platforms like Zoom. Like Cubans aren't allowed to use Zoom.
Y al final es un ejemplo muy palpable de hasta dónde nos afecta el bloqueo de los Estados Unidos a Cuba, y generalmente el pensamiento que tienen los jóvenes al principio cuando no tienen conciencia de esto es lo mismo que pensabas tú. Sí, bueno, esto y parece ridículo, pero es un ejemplo palpable que podemos utilizar para demostrar hasta dónde llega, hasta dónde nos afecta el bloqueo. Porque hay muchas personas que todavía no tienen conciencia de esto y que piensan como tú, oh, ok, esto es producto del gobierno cubano que lo está bloqueando.
So yeah, it seems ridiculous, but this is a very tangible way that we can see the effects of the U.S. embargo. And especially on young people, and a lot of people think, like, oh, this is the fault of the Cuban government.
Sí, y ahí está un poco también la resiliencia, porque luego de que se me fueron acumulando páginas a las que no podía acceder, herramientas a las que no podía acceder, que no podía hacer, alguien me presentó en mi vida lo que significa un VPN.
So it's also like you can speak to resilience, because there were so many tools and pages I couldn't access until someone introduced me to a VPN.
Y es complicado para nosotros porque te das cuenta que ni siquiera con VPN hay mucha gente que puede acceder, porque el VPN exige un gasto de más de los datos de por sí que ya son bastante caros para nosotros.
So data is expensive for Cubans, and a VPN is not accessible to everyone because a VPN takes up more data that won't be affordable to everyone.
Y entonces se complica la ecuación y volvemos a lo que estábamos al principio. Las personas que pueden pagar mayor cantidad de datos, bueno, no les interesa utilizar un VPN para todo lo que necesitan acceder, y con eso a veces se dificulta muchísimo porque te piden una serie de claves, de contraseñas, etcétera, que no son asequibles. Y luego están las personas que tienen los datos justos para comunicarse con su familia y no se pueden dar el lujo de entonces activar un VPN que les permita llegar a esas herramientas o vulnerar ese bloqueo online.
So yeah, we go back to the beginning. The people who have more access and are able to buy more data can more easily afford to go to whatever pages they want. And some people just have enough to just speak to their family and accomplish the bare necessities that they need to do online.
Okay, Liz. So yeah, thank you for answering that question. So another thing that came to my mind when I was watching the first episode, a part that kind of touched me, and I was just kind of I didn't really understand why it had to be like this, right? Was when you were interviewing the founder of the clothing line. I forgot the name of it. Clandestina, right? And so, you know, we learned a little bit about her story, about how this was one of the first like private business ventures in Cuba, right? That happened recently, and how this was a product of the easing up of restrictions and of tensions. So, for me, living in the United States, I'm seeing that the country that I live in right now is going into a new period of aggression, right, against other countries. And from my perspective, it doesn't look like things are going to get any better with countries like Venezuela, Cuba, and China. So I wouldn't be hoping that that more places like Clandestina would come into existence, right? Because it doesn't really make sense, right? Because, you know, things are getting more difficult. I want to ask you, for the younger people in Cuba, where does the hope for a future come from? So what is, for you, maybe you can speak to that on a personal level. What does the future look like for a young Cuban that's like trying to find his way in life?
Esa es una pregunta que me toca muchísimo, sobre todo la experiencia personal, porque yo creo que el mayor challenge que tiene Cuba, que tienen los jóvenes cubanos, es tener un proyecto dentro de Cuba.
So this question really affects me personally, because I think the biggest challenge in Cuba is the young people having a project within Cuba.
Y esta es una de las cosas que tiene Idania. Idania encontró en el momento exacto, en el lugar exacto, una oportunidad para tener un proyecto de vida en Cuba.
And this is something Idania, the co-founder of Clandestina, has been able to succeed in. She was in the right place at the right time. She found a project that allowed her to be in Cuba.
Pero ahora mismo no hay muchos proyectos como el de Idania surgiendo. No hay muchas iniciativas privadas surgiendo. Todo lo contrario. Porque en los últimos años, con la llegada de Donald Trump a la presidencia, estas medidas se han arreciado muchísimo. Por lo tanto, la oportunidad de crecimiento económico, profesional, ha mermado. Ha ido en decadencia.
So, but there's not a lot of initiatives like Idania's. In fact, and there's not a lot of private sector projects like Idania's. And the new policies put in by the Trump administration has tightened restrictions and has made these kinds of projects lessen.
Porque yo creo que la decisión de muchos jóvenes cubanos de emigrar hacia diferentes países, muchos de ellos ahora mismo radicados en los Estados Unidos, no tiene nada que ver con política, sino con proyectos de vida, con oportunidades de crecimiento. Y es muy triste que no encuentren esas oportunidades de crecimiento dentro de su país.
I think that one of the main reasons young people migrate outside of Cuba, a lot of them are based in the United States, doesn't have anything to do with politics. It has to do with the inability to have a life project. Yeah.
Sí, básicamente eso. Porque tengo muchos amigos y amigas que estudiaron conmigo en la universidad y simplemente no lo vieron. ¿Sí? Se graduaron, tenían una carrera por delante y simplemente no lo vieron, no encontraron un proyecto donde pudieran desarrollarse profesionalmente y tener un proyecto de vida. No estamos hablando de sobrevivir en una crisis, sino de vivir una experiencia.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends who I studied with that this happened to them. They graduated with a degree and then they couldn't see a life project. They didn't see opportunities to develop. We're not talking about surviving, we're talking about living an experience.
Y es muy triste, te choca, porque te das cuenta que no tienes permitido o es muy difícil concebirte una vida en un país que simplemente porque no tiene cómo, no te puede ofrecer otra cosa, y es tu país, no tiene nada que ver con el amor que sientes por él, tienes que ver con buscar tu lugar en el mundo y lo que quieras hacer. Por eso yo entiendo a todos los jóvenes cubanos que deciden migrar buscando oportunidades.
It's sad, it hits you when you can't find the opportunity to develop the way you want to within your country, and it has nothing to do with the love you have for your country. I understand, so that's the reason that I understand when young people need to migrate and need to leave. It's the opportunities that just aren't there because of the effects that we have on us.
Y lo triste de todos es que los latinos crecimos escuchando que Estados Unidos es el país de las oportunidades, entonces muchos de ellos se van como persiguiendo el sueño americano, que luego se convierte en una pesadilla, que luego se dan cuenta de que las oportunidades no son para todos, que las oportunidades no son para los migrantes, que de 100 que llegan, 2 tienen éxito rotundo en la vida. Es mucho más triste porque luego yo no sé si el miedo o la concepción de éxito no les permite regresar y decir, ok, no me fue bien, no triunfé, no estoy haciendo lo que quiero.
So Latinos grew up thinking or hearing that the United States is the country of opportunity, and many leave to go chase the American dream. For some people, it turns into a nightmare. For some realize that the opportunities are not there for migrants. They're not available for everyone, and some are not able to come back because they don't want to be confronted with the fact that the success wasn't there for them.
Entonces, la migración es otra de las consecuencias del bloqueo. No lo hablamos en el documental, no lo mencionamos, no lo tocamos, pero es una de las consecuencias del bloqueo que la gente generalmente no ve, porque vivimos en un país, por lo menos donde mi generación y la generación de mis padres no tuvieron la oportunidad o no conocen otro país que no sea un país bloqueado.
We weren't able to talk about it in the documentary, but really the blockade affects immigration. I live in a country where my parents and my generation don't know a country that is not under a blockade.
Porque si sacan cuenta, el gobierno cubano llegó al poder, la revolución cubana llegó al poder en los años 59 y al principio del 59, y en los años 60 ya teníamos un bloqueo efectivo del país más poderoso del mundo, atacando una isla, bloqueando económicamente, intentando asfixiar una isla pequeña en medio del Caribe con 11 millones de habitantes.
The Cuban Revolution triumphed in 1959, and in 1960 we already had a full-on blockade, one of the most powerful countries in the world, pressuring a small island.
Y es difícil separar hasta dónde afecta el bloqueo, hasta dónde nos afecta el bloqueo y qué es el resultado de malas políticas gubernamentales implementadas, porque no tiene margen. Claro que si tenemos problemas internos en Cuba que tenemos que resolver, por supuesto que sí, tenemos problemas como otro país del mundo, pero es muy difícil desvincular los problemas de otros, o por lo menos analizarlos objetivamente.
So it's hard to distinguish which issues are caused by the blockade and which are caused by bad management from the Cuban government. But obviously we have internal problems, every country does, but it's difficult to objectively link which ones are due to what. And it's important to recognize that of the blockade, essentially.
Y esa es una de las cosas que más me llamó la atención del feedback que recibí cuando salió el tráiler, porque hubo personas que se acercaron a mí y me dijeron, bueno, tú sabes que todo no es culpa del bloqueo. Dígole, no, me queda claro, todo no es culpa del bloqueo. Si nosotros intentáramos hablar de todos los problemas que hay en Cuba, de todas las caras de esos problemas, no bastaría un documental de 3 capítulos, tendríamos que hacer uno de 100.
So what hit me most about the feedback that we got from the trailer were a lot of people saying, oh, not all the problems are due to the blockade. Of course, not all the problems are due to the blockade. But if we wanted to do a documentary that talks about all the problems in Cuba and mention all of them, we'd have to do 100 episodes, not 3.
Y entonces es importante que las personas entiendan eso, entiendan sobre todo que el documental lo que se propone es tocar ese aspecto de la vida del cubano. ¿Cómo afecta la política de Estados Unidos al cubano? No al gobierno de Cuba, como ellos dicen, no, al cubano de a pie. ¿Cómo llega a la gente que está intentando sobrevivir en un país donde la escasez es de todo?
So this is what's important for people to know. The documentary touches on how the blockade affects the Cuban people, not the Cuban government, the Cuban people. We're living in a country where the shortages, the scarcity is of everything. There's scarcity of everything.
Y el objetivo era contar esas historias. Y no, por supuesto que no podemos obviar el contexto, pero el peso que tiene de vivir bloqueados durante casi 60 años es muy grande.
So the objective was to tell those stories, and we can't forget the context, but we live in a country that's been blockaded, that's had a blockade for 60 years.
Sobre todo porque estamos acostumbrados, ya no solo en Cuba, sino en todas partes del mundo, a escuchar que los gobiernos siempre tienen un culpable externo, ya sean los migrantes que nos están invadiendo o tal más cual, etcétera, pero nunca se hacen responsables de sus propios errores. Pero en el caso de Cuba es real, es decir, hay un gobierno que nos está atacando y no es cualquier gobierno, es Estados Unidos y está a 90 millas y Estados Unidos no es un pequeño país, es decir, Estados Unidos tiene la potestad de influir en el resto de los países del mundo, o se cree con la potestad.
Every country has blames external forces for the reasons that there are issues. So, for example, the immigrants are attacking us. But in the case of Cuba, it's true. We have a blockade, and it's not a blockade done by any country. It's the United States. It's 90 miles away, and it is has the power to influence any country on Earth, or it thinks it has the power.
Okay, thank you. And so, yeah, just as a final question, I wanted to ask you about something that I've personally faced in my life, right? Growing up in Miami, and that I've seen a lot of people from our community face, right? So a lot of us grew up with parents that only told us stories about what they went through in Cuba, right? A lot of us are just used to like hearing, you know, we left because of this, or, you know, for example, like for me, my family left in the 90s, estamos en el periodo especial, you know, things were very difficult. So my parents saw no other way. For a lot of the older people, right, like the people who actually migrated. So my mom brought me as a child, but she's the one who went through the entire process, right? For a lot of them, it was a very difficult and painful process to leave their country because it's all that they had known. And arriving here in the United States and having everything at your fingertips, having access to, you know, the best, you know, things that you could possibly have in the world, because this is, you know, the country with the largest economy, right, and the most access. A lot of them rejected Cuba, right, and they thought that they left a lie. How can someone from my generation who has been back, who has learned his history, who knows his family's history, how can we begin to have conversations with the older generations here in the United States that all they do is, you know, spread lies and propaganda and misinformation about Cuba? So where do you think that, you living in Cuba, where do you think that conversation begins?
That's a tough one. El problema, Andy, es que cuando se habla de Cuba, cuando se habla de los problemas de Cuba, es muy difícil que no hable alguien desde lo visceral.
The problem, Andy,
No
is
sé
that
si
we're
puedo traducir.
talking about Cuba and we're talking about the problems of Cuba. People don't talk from a visceral point of view.
Es increíble, pero hay mucho odio, mucho rencor, mucho resentimiento en muchos de los discursos que escuchamos sobre Cuba.
Muchos de los que?
De los discursos.
So yeah, there's a lot of hate. There's a lot of ¿cómo se dice rencor?
Like angst.
Yeah, a lot of
grudge. There's grudges, right?
grudges that affect all of the discussions and conversations around Cuba.
Entonces, para tener una conversación con alguien así, lo primero es que tiene que estar abierto a escuchar otra versión que no sea la de ellos mismos.
So when you have a conversation like that, they have to be open to hearing another point of view that isn't just their own.
Porque no puedo hablar por ellos, porque no viví lo que vivieron ellos, pero sí sé que si por lo menos a mí me llega ese discurso de odio y ese discurso no ayuda al pueblo de Cuba.
I can't speak for them because I didn't live that, but I know that that kind of hatred doesn't help the Cuban people, what we're living.
Y hay como una obsesión por catalogarte de izquierda o de derecha, y ni siquiera de izquierda o de derecha. O sea, el adjetivo que utilizan es comunista, como si fuera lo peor del mundo, y todo lo que no coincida con ellos es una comunista y hay que lincharla. Y eso lo que hace es dividirnos como pueblo.
There's this obsession of categorizing us as left or right, and it's not even left or right, it's communist, which is like the worst thing in the world. But really what that's doing is dividing us as a people.
Porque no tienes que estar de acuerdo con las políticas o con el gobierno de Cuba, o sí, no tienes que estar de acuerdo simplemente con lo que no piensas, pero yo creo que tienes que respetar la manera de pensar de otros y aprender a vivir en sociedad y en comunidad, porque yo creo que tú eres tan cubano y tus hijos, tu descendencia, en algún momento será tan cubana como los míos, porque todos somos parte de lo mismo.
So you don't have to agree with the Cuban government, or with the politics, but you do have to respect others' point of view, and you do have to learn how to live in community with others because you're Cuban.
Y lo otro es que al final lo que hacen es dividirnos, porque hay familias que no se hablan, hay hermanos que no se hablan, hay gente que ha dejado de quererse o ha sacado a personas de su vida simplemente porque piensan diferente, y todos son cubanos.
It's dividing us as a people. There are families that no longer speak to each other. There are brothers and sisters that don't speak to each other. There are people who've taken their loved ones out of their lives. It's dividing us, and all these people are Cuban.
Y termina afectándonos porque más allá de si te gusta el gobierno de Cuba o no, más allá de si estás de acuerdo con las políticas del gobierno de los Estados Unidos o no hacia Cuba, al final del día, una persona que ama a su país, que quiere lo mejor para su país, para sus coterráneos, lo que quiere es que todos podamos vivir en paz y que tengamos las mismas oportunidades.
So beyond whether or not you agree with the Cuban government or with the politics or the measures that the United States takes, at the end of the day, we all want to be able to live in peace and have the same access to opportunity.
Entonces, este grupo de personas, de familias, que durante más de 6 décadas ha incentivado ese odio contra la isla, ese odio contra lo que piensa diferente, que ha albergado tanto rencor, son los que están detrás ahora mismo de la política que la administración de Trump está tomando, aplicando contra el gobierno de Cuba. Es dinero, pero también es poder. Es decir, hay muchos intereses mediando ahí y te das cuenta que son intereses de ciertas y determinadas familias, porque no todos los cubanos americanos piensan igual. Muchos están a favor de la normalización de las relaciones con Cuba, de llevemos la fiesta en paz.
So these people who have been hating the island, throwing hate at the island for 6 decades, they're behind the measures that are making it worse for Cubans. And it's not only money, it's also power.
Y al final son familias que terminan dividiendo otras familias, que terminan dividiendo amigos, y es un efecto dominó. Y entre tanto odio no podamos encontrar una solución para todos, porque hoy estoy en Cuba y quiero lo mejor para Cuba, pero si mañana estoy en Tahití, como cubana voy a seguir queriendo lo mejor para Cuba. No es justo de que digan, bueno, es que esas sanciones están ayudando a que haya un cambio de régimen en Cuba y finalmente puedan vivir en paz. Pero no es un cambio que estás viviendo tú. Si las sanciones no las estás viviendo tú, las está viviendo tu familia, las están viviendo tus vecinos, las están viviendo tus coterráneos.
It's a domino effect. So these people who are making all of these policy changes are splitting up families, they're splitting up friends, and it's not enough to say, okay, like all of these sanctions, they're not affecting me. They're affecting your family, they're affecting your neighbors, they're affecting your people where you grew up.
Y es muy, y creo que eso también deja ese sabor amargo del rencor que guardan, de cómo se radicalizan una vez salen de la isla, cómo el estar abierto es irónico, porque están abiertos, una vez en Estados Unidos están abiertos a un abanico más grande de oportunidades, pero no están abiertos a un abanico más grande de criterios.
So it's ironic because, and this is like the issue with the hatred, it's ironic because you go to the United States and you're more open to all of these opportunities, but you're not open to all of these different points of views.
Y entonces eso limita mucho la conversación. ¿Lo quieres decir de nuevo o te interrumpí? No he terminado, pero estaba esperando que lo tradujeras. Perdón.
Ya terminé.
Ok. Eso limita mucho la conversación. Eso no deja margen para que haya un entendimiento y para que haya como un punto medio y una medida. Porque la gente dice, bueno, pero todo esto lo que está provocando o empujando es hacia un cambio de régimen. Pero llevan 60 años pujando por un supuesto cambio de régimen que no acaba de suceder, porque lo que tenga que suceder en Cuba lo tienen que resolver los cubanos de adentro y los cubanos de afuera, pero como cubanos, como ciudadanos cubanos y no empujados por otro país que al final, durante 60 años, más allá de empujar un cambio de régimen o un cambio de gobierno, si el gobierno sigue en el mismo lugar y los que han sufrido las consecuencias son los cubanos.
So they say that they want a change of regime, but they've been pushing for a change of regime for 60 years. Hasn't happened. If there's change that needs to happen in Cuba, it really needs to come from Cubans on the island, outside of the island, but from Cubans.
Okay. Esas son todas las preguntas que tenía. Those are all the questions that I had for you. Thank you so much. I'm really excited for the upcoming episodes. I'm definitely going to be watching. I'm excited for where the story is going to go, and like I said, I'm really thankful to Belly of the Beast and to you for elevating your voice and being so courageous, because this isn't something that's easy to do. And to Belly of the Beast for taking time to helping us, to help us tell our stories.
Yeah, of course.
No. Muchísimas gracias. Antes, Luna, quiero decir solo unas cositas. Sí, yo soy la cara que ustedes ven en la pantalla, pero el medio Belly es mucho más que eso. Hay mucha gente maravillosa detrás del resultado que ustedes ven. Ojalá existiera making of y pudieran conocer a Daniel, a Maite, a Frank, a René, a María, a Ed, a Luna, a Rit. Es todo un equipo que hay detrás de la producción de ese documental, porque como dicen aquí, yo soy solo la carita, pero detrás de la carita está la mente, los brazos, los que ejecutan todo, y es un montón de gente maravillosa y talentosa por la cual yo estoy feliz y me siento honrada de haber compartido y trabajado con ellos.
Gracias, Liz. Yeah, she's saying that there's, she's the face, but there's a lot of people who are working on it, a lot of people. And I do want to say, like, I think Belly of the Beast is super special because it's a collective of Cubans and foreigners telling the stories in a way that's not parachute journalism. So there's this like practice in mainstream journalism where reporting on the global south or the third world, where they come for 2 weeks, they get like paid to go fly somewhere for 2 weeks, they follow someone around, they write a story, they like come back, and that's it. And the problem is a lot of the times it lacks nuance, it lacks context, and the stories aren't being created in collaboration and incubating with the actual communities that live in the places that the stories are being told. Belly of the Beast is really important because we were able to create stories in collaboration with foreigners. It's something that we miss a lot, and it's very important. And I do want to say also, like, it is very courageous, Liz, to be able to be the face and to talk publicly about what you think, especially for a U.S. audience. Andy as well, it is very courageous to have certain values in certain communities. I'm very well aware. I think that it's really beautiful. And yeah, I also just want to uplift this thing about this, you talked about it, Andy, the scene in the movie where Ivania says, you know, there was a moment, like everything was happening, it was due to this private sector opening. There was a moment where I really felt like I don't have to leave my country. And I think so this is very important for Latinos and people of color in the United States to understand, like, people have families and communities and lives in other countries. It's really important for us to really recognize the context at which people have to leave and why people leave. And I really appreciate, Andy, when you uplift like your point of view, and you're very honest about your story about coming to the United States with your mom because the special period was really hard, and speaking about that without shame, talking badly about your country. It's really important and refreshing.
Yo creo que, gracias por tus palabras primero, y yo creo que es una responsabilidad que tengo como mujer negra, como periodista, es decir, poder levantar mi voz y hablar al respecto sin tapujos. Creo que es mi responsabilidad, creo que estoy cumpliendo con lo que me toca, porque generalmente no escuchamos esas voces, no están. No, a nadie viene a preguntarme qué pienso sobre. Puede ser que me digan, estás equivocada, eres una comunista, pero nadie viene a preguntarme a una mujer negra cubana, bueno, ¿y tú qué piensas del bloqueo? ¿Qué es para ti el bloqueo?
So it's really important, or I think it's my responsibility as a woman and as a Black woman, to speak without filter, because no one comes to me and asks me like what my opinion is or what I think about the embargo.
Es muy fácil que las personas tomen por sentados lo que piensas tú, o que las personas tomen una opinión como única y las demás las desechen. Y yo creo que por eso le doy muchas gracias a Beli por permitirme la oportunidad de hablar, de expresarme, de hablar desde mi experiencia y sobre todo hablar, pero por supuesto mi voz no es la única voz, hablar desde lo que creo que es y sobre todo desde la representatividad.
Yeah, so it's rare to be able to speak and share opinion, but that's why she's thankful to have the experience with Belly of the Beast to be able to talk about this. and just have the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something as well. Just I think that like it's obviously you know, for Cubans that are living here in the United States who've immigrated or who may be like first or second generation, it's really hard to go against, you know, the entire community that exists here in the United States, which is just completely anti-Cuba. And like I really just hope that through documentaries like this one that we saw right now, and through the conversations that we're having, other Cubans will be able to see this that live here in the United States or somewhere else around the world, and maybe they'll feel a little bit less ashamed to be Cuban, because I know that like growing up here in the United States, if you weren't called a rafter, you were called a commie or whatever. So I think it's just really important for people to really have a firm understanding of their history. That's the number one most important thing. And at the same time to connect with the real life people like Liz who live in Cuba and who have those experiences that everyone in our communities loves to tell us about. So
Sí,
yeah, thank you
es
guys.
no, un placer. Es increíble porque muchos de los comentarios en Instagram son como llenos de odio y de resentimiento. Y alguien me preguntó, ¿no tienes miedo a que te acusen de comunista? ¿No tienes miedo a que te apunten con el dedo o que tomen represalias contra ti? ¿O no tienes miedo de lo que pueda tomarte o de ser objeto de bullying o cosas así? Y yo me quedé así, más miedo me da quedarme sin proyecto de vida, más miedo me da quedarme sin opciones, más miedo me da quedarme callada, más miedo me da que este país siga así y que no veamos la luz al final del túnel. Eso me da miedo. Quedarme sin opciones. No tengo muchas, aquí en Cuba no tengo muchas opciones, pero me da mucho más miedo quedarme sin opciones.
Liz is referring to our social media comments that are perpetually full of a lot of people calling us commies and giving a very unnuanced critique of our documentary without seeing it. And so she says that a lot of people asked her, are you afraid of being called a communist? Are you afraid of being targeted in this way? People have been targeting her for being the face of this documentary. And she says, I'm more afraid to give up on my life project. I'm more afraid to be quiet, to remain silent. I'm more afraid that we are left without a light at the tunnel, at the end of the tunnel. I'm more afraid that this country never changes. So no, like I'm more afraid to just be quiet.
¿Alguna otra cosa?
Muchísimas gracias a los dos. Seriously, I think this is really amazing, and I really hope that we can continue in conversation together, especially around just this really important connection between the young people, specifically Latinos, specifically Cubans, Cuban Americans in the United States, and people who are living in Cuba, who are constantly feeling the daily pressure and ramifications and material challenges of the embargo. I've said this every event we've had, but I'll say it again because it's very important. The United States, if you can vote, we are voting for representatives who enforce an embargo. And all of us, even if we're not documented, pay taxes, and the taxes go not to healthcare or to schools or to social services that we need. They go to war, and they go to economic warfare on Cuba, one of the places that they go to, but most of our taxes go to war. So as leftists, I think, or as just young people who care about the world, I think most young people deeply care about the world. It's very important that we stay alert and aware of what's happening. And also, Belly of the Beast is going to be putting out obviously a couple more episodes and a couple more short videos You can follow us at Belly of the Beast Cuba on Instagram and Facebook, and Belly Beast Cuba on Twitter. And obviously subscribe to our YouTube. And if you have any comments or questions, you can also email us bellyofthebeastcuba@gmail.com.
Muchas gracias a las dos y a todos los que fueron parte de esta producción.
Gracias a ti.